Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce this panel. So good afternoon and welcome to the second session of the inaugural symposium hosted by the Clinic for Asylum, Refugee, and Immigrant Services at the Villanova University Charles Widger School of Law. My name is Tanya Valdez and I'm an adjunct professor in the CARES Clinic. We have a wonderful group of presenters here today discussing the Black immigrant experience. And thank you all so much for joining us. So before we begin, I just have a few logistical points. First, just so everyone is aware, this session is going to be recorded. If you have a question during the program at any point, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We will get to as many questions as we can toward the end of the program. We're providing free CLE credit for this panel thanks to a generous gift from our donor, Joseph Azrak. If you are seeking CLE credit for this program, you'll need to fill out a course evaluation. The course evaluations will be sent by the end of the program today and is due back by the end of the day tomorrow. Only those who registered for this panel will receive the course evaluation needed to get the CLE credit. So if you are attending but did not register yet, please send us a note in the Q&A so that we can make sure that you get that information. Throughout the course today, and in the course evaluation, you will be asked for 2 secret words to help verify your attendance at this program. These 2 secret words will be given out during the program, and it's your responsibility to write them down. Per the Pennsylvania CLE board rules, Villanova is not allowed to share the words with you if you miss them, so be sure that you're keeping an ear out for those 2 words throughout. If you have any questions about CLE credit or other logistics, please also use the Q&A function for those. And lastly, we've created a resources page with links to relevant articles and other information related to the topic of this panel, and I will post the link to the website in the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Tamarrin Johnson, one of our dedicated students in the CARES Clinic and the organizer of this wonderful panel, to introduce the panelists.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamarrin Johnson. I am a third-year law student here at Villanova University, and I am a representative in the CARES Clinic. Tonight's panel will discuss the unique impact of immigration laws and policies on the Black immigrants and how the immigration system reinforces systems of oppression, as well as ways for communities to fight back. As we go through the panel, please feel free to drop any questions that you may have in the Q&A box, as mentioned before, at the bottom of the screen. We will answer them at the end. We have some wonderful panelists with us tonight. So to start things off, if you all could introduce yourselves, please.
I can go first. Excuse me. My name is Karla McKanders, and I'm a law professor and lawyer at Vanderbilt University Law School in Nashville, Tennessee. I teach immigration law and refugee law, and I also direct the Immigration Practice Clinic. So in the clinic, my students provide representation to humanitarian immigrants, individuals who have asylum claims or representing unaccompanied minors in removal proceedings. In my work as a lawyer, I provide representation I have provided representation to immigrants of African descent. Also, when I taught on a Fulbright in Morocco, I helped start a refugee legal aid organization that provided refugee assistance for mainly refugees from Western African countries in Morocco. And as a scholar, I've written on the ways in which at the intersection of immigration law and racial justice, immigration laws have had a unique impact on immigrants of African descent, or stated otherwise, how African, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Caribbean immigrants are racialized Black at the US borders.
Awesome, guess I'll go next. My name is Denzel Mcdonald. I am currently working with the Biden-Harris campaign. I'm an DACA recipient. And I work with undocumented folks in the Black community, especially. We have done a number of things, including helping students make sure that they have the resources to transition from high school and college into what's next for them, as well as being a resource for undocumented folks as adults to know how to navigate different systems as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sydelle. I too am on DACA. I work mostly as an organizer, and most of my work is through storytelling. I just believe that there's power in stories. So I usually stick to storytelling, but I've done a lot of work such with Denzel. We've done, as he's mentioned, some work with some high school students, navigating life after high school, and just honestly, truly just working with the community to just navigate life itself here in America, just being Black and undocumented.
Thank you guys so much for that. Before we get started into the content of today's panel, I'm going to give the first CLE word. And the first CLE word is windy. First CLE word is windy. In a sentence, it was windy today. All right, so moving back into the questions, as Professor McKanders already mentioned, she's done a lot of research in this area. So could you give us a little bit of background on the laws that have disproportionately impacted Black immigrants in America?
I think you can start with more recently two separate categories. One, there is a prison to deportation pipeline that adversely impacts Black immigrants in the United States. And then two, you can look at the impact of the current administration's policies on immigrants, Black immigrants in the United States. In 1996, there was a law that was passed. It was called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, which is known as IRA. And what this did was it increased the number of crimes for which an individual can be removed or deported from the United States. And so if you have a green card or if you are a lawful permanent resident, you can be removed from the country if you are arrested for certain crimes. And so once this law went into effect, we saw that it had a disproportionate impact on Black immigrants. There is an organization, it's called the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and they wrote a report on the impact of IRA. And what they found was, and some of the statistics that they examined, that 76% of Black immigrants are deported on criminal grounds, which is compared to 45% of all immigrants. And despite making up only 7.2% of the non-citizen population in the United States. So we see there is a disproportionate impact of the criminalization of activity on Black immigrants. And 20% of people facing deportation on criminal grounds are Black. And then we see another area. The Trump administration has been, since it's been in power, its policies have had a disproportionate impact on Black immigrants. For example, the travel ban, which banned the entry of foreign nationals from a enumerated list of countries, including Muslim majority countries like Somalia and Sudan, increased the deportation rates. They more than doubled for certain countries, such as Somalia. So what the law is doing here, what the function of the law is that being Black, we know in our society in America makes you a target, then being Black and undocumented will make you vulnerable to surveillance, punishment, and then deportation.
Thank you so much. I think that's really important when you're talking about the prison to deportation pipeline. And we already know that in America, Black people just in general are 5 times more likely to be to go to prison for any kind of crime. So do any of you want to kind of talk about the way that those two things kind of collide as being a Black immigrant and also being just Black in America?
Yeah, for sure. When we look at our communities are heavily populated, right? And I mean, police. And of course, where there are more police, there are more arrests. So we have growing up, you always heard you always have to be on your P's and Q's because you don't know what's going to happen, right? Being undocumented, a simple misdemeanor or anything could land you not only in jail, but now in deportation status. So especially for Black undocumented folks, there's more of a more pressure to like walk the straight line, quote unquote, just because of how much our communities are policed.
Yeah, and just to just to go back to Denzel, like he was saying, just because we are more likely to be stopped, then we're more likely to be arrested, which would lead to deportation. Um, so that always leads. But I just wanted to talk about something a little different. I know for me, it has always felt like being Black and undocumented, like it's almost like there's two targets on my back when it comes to living in America. There's first being Black, and then there's being undocumented. And when those two things collide, your world can literally explode. Um, and to give like a really good example of that, it's like this year, June of 2020, this year. I know that was the heaviest that I've ever felt, that weight on me, with just all of the racial unjust going on. And then as a DACA recipient, I was just kind of waiting for the Supreme Court to come back with um, with the hearing. So it always feels extremely heavy as we're sitting and waiting, and we're just kind of living in this time, especially with the Trump administration.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, that it's a very heavy experience to have to deal with two very like big things all at one time. So when dealing with those kinds of two competing things at the same time, a lot of these people end up having to navigate the immigration system and the court system and preparing cases. Can any of you speak to specific barriers that Black immigrants face that kind of make it a little more difficult in order to get a fair case and get before the board and, have a positive outcome?
As an attorney, I think that consciousness is starting to be raised about the unique issues that an individual experiences at the intersection of their race, their Blackness, and their immigration status. For example, in 2018, I took a group of students down to the Tijuana border, and at the border, there was a significant population of Latinx communities, Central Americans, who were trying to approach the border and apply for asylum. Also present was a significant group of Haitians, Cameroonians, Mauritanians, who had traveled all the way from Africa, had come up sometimes through South America, and then traveled to Central America to get to the border. When they got to the border, and they're either through this president's Remain in Mexico policy or through the policy that they would be detained, they experience unique issues. In the detention facilities, access to interpreters is limited. Access to representation, which is an issue for all immigrants, is particularly an issue for immigrants of African descent. When you're filing an asylum claim or you're contesting your removal, access to attorneys who have country conditions information is an issue. And so in terms of entry into the country and applying for certain forms of immigration relief, it can be particularly daunting for immigrants who are trying to navigate their way through, sometimes without access to counsel. And if they're moved from the detention facilities into the interior of the country, immigration detention facilities are in remote locations. So access again to attorneys, access to individuals that can help you, attorneys who can help you challenge your cases, is very limited. And we know that individuals who have access to attorneys in removal proceedings are more likely to be successful. So you see a higher rate of deportation for immigrants of African descent.
And as Karla said, access to attorneys is important. That's something that is a barrier. But also when Black and immigrants, period, they do get bond, there is also a need for funding, right? So we see time after time that people can't raise the money for the bond for their case, and then they are still deported, or they still have to stay in the detention center because they can't raise that capital for that.
Yes, and to piggyback a little off of that, I think for me, what bothers me the most is the lack of support that we see. And a lot of times that's not something intentional. It's like a lot of these people, they're here, they've come by themselves, or they have family who just does not have that financial need. So when we are looking for resources, there's very limited resources, especially when it comes to Black immigrants. I know in my experience, I typically see resources for Latin Americans, Latin immigrants. So it's it becomes really difficult when you're already in ICE custody and you're already trying to navigate the system, and you need an interpreter, you don't understand exactly what's going on and all of these things, and then you don't have that support also with you.
Yeah, I think all of that was very right on point. Throughout this panel so far, we have, and even in the title of the panel, we use the word Black. And I think it can be a bit of a misnomer sometimes because Black is such a broad word and it covers such a large group of people. So knowing that Black immigrants come from so many different places and have so many different experiences, can each of you talk a little bit about what it means to be a Black immigrant in America?
I can speak from the legal perspective, and that term is evidence of how race is a social construct in the United States. And when you come into the United States, immigrants of African, Caribbean, African descent are racialized Black at the border. For example, one of my clients who is Afro-Honduran, who is from the Garifuna tribe, she approached the border, and Customs and Border Protection told her that she could not be Honduran because the color of her skin was Black. And so then there were certain assumptions that were placed upon her because of the color of her skin, that she was lying, she wasn't being truthful, that she didn't have a proper asylum claim because of the color of her skin. And so this concept of race, permeates the immigration system in that people come from diverse places, and they're not used to being defined by the color of their skin. But when they traverse the borders of the United States, they become Black. And then as a newly initiated Black American, they experience particular harms that within an immigration system that sometimes renders them invisible because they look at the color of their skin, but they do not you cannot see someone's immigration status from looking at them. And that invisibility produces certain unique harms for immigrants who are racialized Black at the border.
So for me, in my experience, to be Black in America and to be an immigrant, a Black undocumented immigrant in America is in a way to be invisible, right? When you tell people that you are undocumented, if they know what that means, then they look at you like, are you really? Like, you speak American, you've always done everything that we've done. Like you kind of feel invisible. As we were talking, Sydelle mentioned earlier, a lot of resources, there are not a lot of resources for Black immigrants. Like we're now in an era where, we're proclaiming that Black Lives Matter, and we've seen a lot of Black immigrant organization, pop up. We have Baji, we have UndocuBlack, and a couple of others. So now in this era, I do feel a little bit more represented. I do feel like I have a face, and I see other people with me. But growing up, that's how it felt. It felt like I wasn't a part of one group or another. I didn't have anyone to direct me, or show me a path to what it means to be Black and undocumented. And just, on the Black side, just being solely Black, being in America and being in a time where there's a lot of injustices going on, and there's a lot of disproportional things happening for the Black community. Again, it feel invisible. You feel like there's a target on your back, as Sydelle said earlier, and then there's two targets on your back because not only are you Black, but you are also undocumented. At any time, you can be stopped and not only possibly shot for just being Black, but you can also be held in a detention center for however long, and then sent back to a country that you know nothing of. So that's been my experience. Being able to be a resource for others so that they don't have that same experience as me has been my driving force, so that people could see themselves in me and know that not only does it gets better per se, but like there is hope, there is a future for you, and that there are resources out there for you.
Yeah.
Denzel brings up a really good point that about the intersection of your identity. And I think most people know by now that Opal Tometi, who started the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, also was one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I think that emphasizing the transformational solidarity that can occur between different groups, from Black Lives Matter to the Vaji group, it kind of demonstrates the ways in which we can work together to, at the intersection of all of these different identities, to attack and find solutions to remedy racism in the United States.
So Sydelle, I know we were just talking about what it means to be Black in America and how a Black immigrant in America, and how Black is such a broadly used term. And I know you do a lot of storytelling, and I just wondered if you would, like to chime in a little bit on your story and what it means for you to be a Black immigrant in America.
Can you guys hear me? Tamarrin, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening right now. The internet is just all over the place. I'm figuring it out. Okay, so for me, I know I struggled with this a lot, with being identified as Black. It was never really a conversation. People don't know that until they have a conversation with me. What they see first and foremost is my Blackness. And I really had to come to terms with that. So for me, I've always had a really difficult time with it, just trying to figure the whole thing out. And it's not that I don't want to identify as Black. I'm perfectly fine with being identified as Black. But I think that sometimes it does erase a little bit of you and what you really see yourself as, because you really have to identify. I had to really come to terms with what people see versus what I know. So that was always a difficult thing for me.
And kind of going off of that, we know that how people, perceive you is kind of everything. And here in America, there is a tendency to perceive immigrants as being mostly from the Latinx community. And so you go into this country and you're already seen as a minority, and you're not really given a whole lot of even spotlight when it comes to immigrant issues. So being that a lot of Black immigrants come from countries where they are the racial majority, and you have to come here and go through that transition, can any of you speak to what that adjustment is like?
Okay. So don't laugh. Yeah, so I knew as a really young girl, if I'm being completely honest, I knew one white person ever in my life. And that was growing up in Trinidad and Tobago. There was one girl, her family lived there, and to this day, I'm always trying to remember why. And she was the only person that I knew. And so when I came to America, it was definitely a shock to me to see what it was like here. And when I first moved to America, I did live in a predominantly Black community, but with teachers being white and going into establishments and seeing white people was definitely a culture shock for me. It was definitely something new. It was definitely something that I had to adjust to. I didn't really watch a lot of TV growing up. That was really something that was kind of forbidden in my house. So I wasn't exposed to it on TV. I wasn't exposed to it in my everyday life. So to come here and to see that it was a thing or it was a reality definitely shocked me. I definitely had to get used to it. And now it's normal to me, I guess, as normal as it can be. So it definitely takes some getting used to.
Just to run the question again, it's just being many Black immigrants come from countries where they are the majority. Can you speak to the adjustment from going from being the majority to now being the minority here in the US?
Thank you for repeating. So again, I'm from the same place Sydelle is. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago as well. And Trinidad and Tobago, there are two populations of people, right? You have Afro-Trinidadians and you have Indo-Trinidadians. Growing up my entire life, I've known about race. Moving here, again, like Sydelle, I was primarily in I live in a Black community, an African American community. All on interactions with other races was in college. So there was an adjustment with just culture, growing up, just always being around people, of your same culture. I went to church and a Caribbean church, So my first exposure outside of that culture was college, and to be honest, it was a culture shock for me because you're now immersed not only in your culture but like everyone's culture, and seeing how everyone does something different. And I embraced it at first. Again, it was a culture shock, but I embraced it because you get to learn outside of that. You get to expand and then bring those things home, like the things that you like. And, we could now do stuff differently because different things, and then you can also bring those to your friends. And then they learn. My friends come to Christmas. They come to New Year's, things that we have. So it was a culture shock, but it wasn't too much of it because I embraced it to learn from new cultures.
As an attorney, an African-American attorney, I can give a perspective from my client's viewpoint. I've represented asylum seekers who are from, Africa. One of my clients is from the Gambia, and we always have conversations about what it means to be a Black man in the United States. And a couple of weeks ago, we saw, the video of an ICE officer stopping a Black man who was jogging and, questioning him because he was being, racially profiled. And so I brought in a quote from Tamarrin Ngozi Adichie in her book, Americana, because she talks about this concept of being initiated into Blackness in America. And in her book, Americana, she says, "Dear non-American Black, when you make a choice to come to America, you become Black. Stop arguing, stop saying I'm Jamaican or I'm Ghanaian. America does not care. So what if you weren't Black in your country? You're in America." And so this is like the insidiousness of racism in America, that it eviscerates the qualities, the diversity that you bring into the country. And you have, it makes you have to assimilate to this racialized caste system. And it is an initiation that takes place. My client, a client from the Gambia, has to learn about, jogging down the street and possibly being stopped by both police officers and Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE officers at the same time. So his Blackness, his identity, the color of his skin is becoming policed. And in the book Americana, the author goes on to talk about how she's in a classroom. And as a Nigerian American, she has to explain the concept of Blackness when her identity is conceptualized more broadly than the construct of Blackness in the United States.
I think you brought up something very pivotal to my life, because growing up, when you're filling out forms, it says white, African American, etc. Now it just says Black, or African American. But growing up, I remember all the forms always said African American, and I never identified as African American. I always identify as Caribbean American or Afro-Caribbean, West Indian, all of those, but never African American. So I never knew how to fill out those forms. I would always check other. And like, I remember, I believe it was 5th grade, my friend saw me check other, and he was like, wait, are you not Black? And to kind of explain to him my Blackness, and to know that, I do identify as Black, but I don't identify as African American, was kind of strange for him. And being in 5th grade, like, I didn't know that much about, how I identify, but I just knew I didn't identify as that. And that's, he's still one of my best friends, and he's, through our relationship, like, he understood more of, my identity and how I identify through that.
Thank you guys so much for that. So we're now going to open the floor up for Q&A. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the question and answer box down on the bottom of the screen. So one question that we have is, as a civil rights lawyer and a trans woman and a Villanova grad, mostly working on trans disability cases, can any of you comment on what experience you may have encountered with the intersection between people that are trans or disabled and people of color?
So not my direct experience. I do know of stories where, when you have that intersectionality of trans, Black, and undocumented, a lot of times in ICE detention centers, they don't recognize trans folks, right? They put them in the side of what they don't identify as. They don't provide the necessary medicines for them. And it's just always a overall horrible situation for trans folks in detention centers. You always have groups fighting for them to make sure that they get the basic needs that they need. So yes, like there are organizations working directly with trans undocumented Black folks. And if you need any information, like, we could for sure direct you for that. I'm not sure if I answered that question, but there is like an intersectionality that
As an attorney, as an immigration attorney, I haven't had the opportunity to work with the trans community, so I can't speak directly to providing representation. I can speak to providing representation to individuals, people of color who have mental disabilities or mental impairments, and working in the immigration system with the immigration courts to attempt to get a reasonable accommodation for individuals in proceedings. And one of the things that becomes obvious when you're representing someone in immigration proceedings are the ways in which having an attorney helps an individual to have access to, have a conversation, to ask a judge, for an accommodation. And we know that most people that are detained, one of the largest or the biggest issue is, not having access to attorneys. And when you don't have access to attorneys, you can't, make a request for specific accommodations. And so I think, one of the things I mentioned before that is an issue is that a lot of the immigration detention facilities are in remote areas, which, exacerbates the problem of access to counsel. Or you have individuals who are detained in county facilities, which again is another access issue in terms of being able to access your attorney, being able to have an individual who can make arguments on your behalf and challenge some of the issues that are occurring, because you're detained with the detention facility, and then also in, challenging your removal or deportation from the United States.
I just wanted to say something really quick because I really do appreciate this question, because I think that with this question, I think that it's important that we remember that being Black is not where our lives end, and it intersects with so many other things. Whether you're a part of the LGBTQ community, whether you are disabled. So our lives really do intersect, whether you're undocumented, it intersects with so many different things. And sometimes you're all four of those things, right? So it's really important that we are thinking of these people as well. Because Karla brought up really good points. Like there are some people who are unable to ask certain questions and they're unable, and we have to remember that ICE intention is to make people give up, is to make people want to leave on their free will. So people are treated poorly. So people aren't given their medications, and they aren't given the resources and the access to the things that they need for basic survival. So I just want to say thank you to that question, because I just think it's really important to remember that our lives does not end with just being Black. There are so many other things that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
Thank you guys so much for that. And thank you for that amazing question. So a big part of wanting to put together this panel was to shed light on the unique experiences that Black immigrants face and the challenges that they go through. So I really want to make sure that we leave everyone who has come to attend this panel with some tangible things that they can do moving forward to really help uplift and help move this community forward. And so if any of you could kind of talk about how non-lawyers could support the Black immigrant community through organizing, like something they could do today, something they could do in like the next week, or something they could do in a more long-term kind of way.
Yeah, so for me, I hope everyone can hear me. My internet is just all over the place today. So for me, this right here, creating spaces for Black immigrants, and even if it's not just a space solely for Black immigrants, it's to be inclusive. Just invite us on the panels, invite us into the rooms where we can have the conversations. Because when you have a panel that looks one way, people are going to walk away with that being everything and all they know. So it's really important to just really be inclusive, invite us into things. I think that really that goes a long way of support, because I can't count how many times I've been to immigration events and I'm just like, I am the only person that looks like me. And that is very problematic. We all know that representation matters. So I would say that, and within the next week, just reach out. It's a really difficult week with us, with the election just barely 8 days away, with election day, technically barely 8 days away. So just, if you know of someone that is an immigrant, Black or not, just reach out, say hi, thinking about you, because honestly, truly, support really does go a long way.
I think on that note, like voting is important because our immigration system is structured so it is controlled by the political branches of the government. And so who's in office really matters in terms of what immigration policies are set. And we know that this administration has changed the face of immigration law and asylum law based upon executive orders and changes to regulations. Because immigration is a political, entity, voting, talking to your Congress people, talking to them specifically about what immigration policies you think should be passed, is extremely, extremely important. Denzel, do you have anything to add? Because I know you're involved.
So yes, we, as you know, undocumented folks cannot vote. You can vote, please. You can vote for us. You could be representation at the table where we don't have representation. And on top of that, please donate to your local immigration organizations, especially the smaller ones. There are a few Black ones. Do your research, see where your money could be spent the most. We've talked about folks not being able to, get bond because they don't have the financial means to do so. Find those organizations that are providing those funds for people so that they don't have to stay behind cages. We have kids in cages. We have families separated. Do what you can to help them.
Tamarrin, is it okay to give lawyers suggestions for what they can do?
Yes, that actually was my next question. But before we get to that, Denzel and Sydelle, do y'all, or even Professor McKanders, are you aware of any specific organizations that, especially since a lot of people are on the call are in the Philadelphia area, organizations that they could give financially to or support that would help with bond or honestly any of the other issues that we've discussed today?
In the Philadelphia area, PIC, which is the Pennsylvania Immigration, I'm blanking on the full name, but it's the abbreviation is PICC. They are a great organization that we have worked with in the past. Nationally, you have BAIJ, BAIJ, and then you also have sorry?
BAJI.
BAJI. You also have the UndocuBlack Network and a few others. Mm-hmm. Any other ones?
Want to add anything to that? Okay. So moving to Professor McKanders' question, can any of you speak to some things that lawyers can do to help support the community, things that they can do tomorrow, things that they could do over the next few weeks, and things that they can do over the long term?
I think lawyers in general can volunteer pro bono for immigrants who are detained. For example, the American Bar Association, the Immigrant Justice Project, is one organization that I work closely with where individuals can, volunteer to provide assistance for determinations. There's training. So if you feel like you don't understand immigration law, there's training that you can go through to represent individuals seeking to be released from detention. Also, you can volunteer with organizations to help them put together their country conditions reports. There's a lack of country conditions evidence, which is needed for individuals who are applying for asylum. Also, another tip that you can do is, I know that at Vanderbilt, at our law school, we rely on, in the immigration clinic, we rely on volunteer interpreters. So if you speak a foreign language, volunteering to be an interpreter is another way you can contribute to.
Thank you guys so much for that. I think that was definitely very, very helpful. Before we close, the second CLE word is snow. The second CLE word is snow. Used in a sentence, I like snow. That's the second CLE word. So to go ahead and wrap things up, thank you, Sydelle, Denzel, Professor McKanders, so much for taking time to be a part of this panel. This was very, very important to me and to the entire clinic, and we really appreciate you giving us your time and your expertise and insights on these issues. This has been a very enlightening panel, and I really hope that all of the people the participants here will walk away knowing something. I also want to say thank you to our graphic note taker for doing such an awesome job and putting this together. Our graphic art will be sent out to you guys via email, as well as a link to a resource page with all of the information that was given out tonight and some articles and different things that can help you to really stay informed on this issue and to support the Black immigrant community. Also, please feel free to join us tomorrow for our detention panel and next Monday for our panel discussing ICE surveillance of a local pastor who is helping the immigrant community. Thank you again so much, everyone, for joining us, and have a great evening. Good night.